Hello, welcome back to another ARP 2600 preset deep dive, and this is the reward for all your efforts, the pinnacle of presets for the ARP 2600. I'm going to teach you how to speak droid. Surely the most iconic robot sound in history was invented on this instrument in a combination with a human voice, but essentially that is the beeps and tweaks and twiddles and plops of R2D2. Okay, so let's figure out. It's a complex one. It's a difficult one. So strap your brain on, crank it up to 10 or 11 if you like. We've got a slightly non-standard envelope structure in that we're outputting the VCA to the mixer. That's totally normal, but ordinarily we take a VCA envelope from the attack release envelope, and in this case we don't. We use the ADSR instead. In fact, the AR envelope is only used to trigger a sequence. It's not actually used as an intrinsic part of making sound, and that will become significant as we'll see later. Other than that, we've got an input from the VCF, and when we look at the VCF, we might be tempted into thinking the sound isn't particularly daunting because all of our tone is coming from VCO. It's coming from this connection, which actually is coming from VCO2, and everything else is set to null. So you might be fooled into thinking it's pretty straightforward. All we have is one oscillator to worry about. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Right, we're going to deal with it oscillator by oscillator and deconstruct what each of them is doing, because you can see that they're all involved in some way in the process, and we've got this voltage processor down here, and there's sequencers and all sorts of stuff going on. So baby steps. VCO1 is nice and simple. We have no normal connections for the VCO1 anywhere active, and so our only output is this square wave. Pretty standard tuned oscillator, down 3 semitones. That's not dramatically significant. We're taking a square wave output, that's the important thing, and we're coming into one of the slots on VCO2, and we've already identified that VCO2 is our primary sound source, so this is significant. What's this square wave doing? It's a fast, this isn't an LFO, this is a regular tuned oscillator. So what's it doing? Well, it's generating a kind of a robotic element to the sound. Okay, so it sounds like something more out of Alien or whatnot when you really turn it up like that. And when we take that away, we lose all of that very fast vibrato effect. So we've got a little bit of that feeding into the sound. Okay. Other than that, that's nice and simple. VCO1, done. No problem. VCO2 is our main sound source, so that's taking all of the inputs from elsewhere, and we'll deal with them one at a time as we get to them. Let's have a look at VCO3 and try to see how it's involved in the making of the sound, because we can see that there are no connections into the VCF, so it's doing something. Let's find out what. Well, first things first, what inputs have we got? We've got a little bit of keyboard control voltage, but not a whole amount. So the keyboard is having an octave-based control voltage effect on the sound, but not to a dramatic extent. And then we've got this cable coming from a triangular LFO, oscillating at more or less 1 Hertz. That's coming in here, and that's at maximum. So whatever that 1 Hertz LFO is doing, it's doing it as much as it possibly can. These are all pitch modulations, don't forget, frequency modulations. VCO3 in its own right is generating a low frequency wave. So this isn't tone, this is having some kind of modulation effect somewhere. and we can see that it's even been detuned down to there. So we're operating at 1/4 of a hertz. The fundamental oscillator is operating at 1/4 of a hertz for one cycle every 4 seconds. And then that LFO in its own right is being modulated by a triangle wave. Okay, what else have we got going on? We've got a connection coming in here at roughly 2/3 on the scale, and this is coming from the sample and hold generator. Now the sample and hold generator doesn't have an overridden connection, so it's a noise generated, it's a noise gen based sample and hold. In other words, the noise generator, which is set fully to white and fully maximized, so it's generating almost complete pure noise, as complete as the 2600 can generate. So that's the frequency range that's being sampled. It's operating at about 1.3 hertz, so reasonably quick snapshots being taken of this random noise effect, and then being output to 3 different destinations, one of them being VCO3. So I'm talking for an awful long time out here without making any noise, but I want to cover the fact that VCO3 is taking lots of inputs and they're all LFO based inputs. So let's try to kind of, just for now, keep the plates spinning, stack all of this stuff up, and then we'll dive into VCO3 and try to kind of deconstruct it. So we've got 1/4 of a hertz fundamental LFO cycle being affected by a triangular LFO from down here. We've got a sample and hold generator throwing noise out into the VCO more than once a second, and we've also got a cable coming from our mod wheel. So those are all of the inputs into VCO3. Fundamentally, it's an LFO. So where's it going? Well, it's taking a triangle output and it's going in to the voltage processor. And that's why I didn't want to fiddle with anything inside the VCO until we talked about where this was plugging into the overall sound. We have an LFO that's going into this voltage processor. This is then going out, it's being mixed actually with another triangle output from the LFO. So we are really accentuating the triangleness of this low frequency oscillator. So try to imagine, in your mind if you can, multiple different frequency based triangle waves all interacting with each other. The interference patterns that you're going to get with all of those triangles it's going to end up starting to look like the Egyptian pyramids. They're going to be big triangles intersected with smaller triangles, but everything is going to be angular. So we're drawing this kind of pretty angled shape with all of these different effects. So the LFO is, both of these outputs are kind of mixing into each other. So this is a modulation effect being applied to the output from VCO3, which is in itself a triangle wave, modulated by a triangle wave, and then further modulated by yet another triangle wave. All of that nonsense gets output into input 3 of the voltage processor here. So the voltage processor, its output goes into the second phase, if you like, and now we're dealing with this row of processors down here. Finally, this thing comes out, and there we go. There's the end of the story. It's an input source into VCO2. So all of this gubbins that we've just described, all of these triangles being interposed on each other, and then having a noise kind of overlay, the sample and hold based noise pattern like layered on top, is all being fed into VCO2. So let's see what effect all of that is having on VCO2. Let's find it. There it is. So there's it at its maximum. Can you see what's missing? All those notes, when they're being held for a long period of time, they're now all flat. We've lost the boop, mew. All of those triangle sounds that R2D2 makes are coming from VCO3. And the length of time that they're travelling up and then getting randomised and going somewhere else and going back down, all of that stuff is being generated by VCO3. VCO3 is in many ways the heart of R2D2 sound, because those cute sounds, they're all straight lines. It's not something that you might ever really consider when you're thinking about R2D2's voice. How is it made? It's made with other stuff, you know, granted there are lots of other different effects going on here, but this triangle based VCO3 with its fundamental quarter hertz LFO signal being modulated from multiple different sources, all of them generating triangles, gives us that. Okay, so that's just magnificent, absolutely fantastic. When I figured out what VCO3 was doing, it was literally like seeing into the soul of R2D2. This is a very important little module. So let's see just very quickly what each of those controls, now that we understand kind of we got to the end, we sprinted to the end, let's just step back a little bit and look at each one of those inputs in turn. So what I just turned down there was one of the LFO inputs. So we're still getting the little triangle steps. That was quite a big one. And now we've got more. We just got more of these. That's what that's doing. This is the noise component. Take that away. And maximize it. It's more random. That's all it's doing, it's more random. The signal coming out of the sample and hold, because it's generated by white noise, 1.36 times a second, it's outputting a brand new frequency value anywhere in the frequency range, because it's photographing, it's sampling white noise, and it could be any frequency. That frequency is then being fed as a modulation source into the LFO, and you know, adjusting its current signal up or down by that amount, so you get those jumps in signal. Take that down. And then finally we've got the mod wheel getting in on the story. So at the moment my mod wheel is turned all the way down. Now it's up. That's going all over the place. So that's basically VCO3, and we've kind of inadvertently dealt with the voltage processor as well, because all of this stuff that's going on in the voltage processor is taking its input from this triangle wave of VCO3. Just as a matter of interest, while we're looking at the voltage processor, there is a pointless cable. The sample and hold is generating an output into input 6 of the voltage processor. It's not going anywhere and it's not linked. So there you go, that's what it's doing. I haven't actually been able to find a particularly dramatic or significant reason for that cable being there. I'm sure, you know, if you turn linking on, then it's having an effect on the sound. It's introducing more randomness. There's so much randomness there already. I mean, yeah, it could be producing those extra farts of noise. But anyway, as it comes out of the box, it's not actually plugged in. One other quick thing on the voltage processor, got a little bit of lag on this dial here, 0.13 lag. Just cover that very quickly. So that's smoothing out the signal that's being emitted by this output. If I turn that lag off, you get a more urgent sound. So by introducing that little bit of lag at 0.13 it was originally set to, it's just taking some of the frequencies away and reducing some of the randomness of the signal. Okay, so I've defaulted back to the original preset. We've got this connection coming in here, and that's at a reasonable, healthy level. So let's see where that's coming from. That's coming from sequencer output. So we haven't really discussed what role the sequencer is playing in the sound yet, so let's deal with that now. First things first, the AR envelope is the thing that's being used as a gate to open the sequencer. We've seen that many times, completely standard, and that's the only effect that the AR envelope is having on this sound. As we saw earlier, the main VCA output is being opened by the ADSR envelope up here, and we can see that that has an 8 millisecond attack, which seems very, very quick. No decay time to speak of, but maximum sustain. So it's almost exactly the same as an attack release envelope. It's got this 8 millisecond attack on. Other than that, there's no difference between the two. So let's figure out what's going on here. Where is this envelope being fired from? Because it's being overridden. It's not being fired by the keyboard. It's being triggered by gate bus 1. So what that means is that every time bus 1 opens, the envelope is firing. It has a minuscule attack on it, and then it's being held fully open. Now, as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of the 16 steps are gate 1 steps. And that's really significant because a substantial part, like an intrinsic part of R2D2's voice, is that it's not constant. You have those gaps, those pauses where you're not getting beeps and blips. And that's coming from the fact that we're opening the gate, opening the ADSR, which is allowing the sounds to pour into the VCA when gate 1 opens and never at any other time. Furthermore, because we have an 8 millisecond attack on the envelope, when the sequencer, we'll get to the speed at which the sequencer is operating, but it's actually possible for notes to sound faster than that, and we won't hear those super, super fast notes. What I'm going to do by way of showing you how this all works is firstly hold a note down, okay, and we get the chatter. I'm going to turn the attack up. Let's see what happens. We get less chatter, significantly less chatter. We still get notes. Now, can you see the sequencer varying dramatically with how fast it's cycling? Sometimes it's really quick and sometimes it's really slow. And only when it's really slow are we actually hearing the notes. The further I turn this up, the fewer sounds we'll hear. Conversely, if I make this basically 0, we get maximum chatter. Okay. The clock speed is being modulated by this cable. This cable is coming out of the sample and hold generator. So, remember every 1.36 times a second, the sample and hold generator is taking a new photograph of its white noise. It's getting a new value, a new control voltage value from the noise generator that is its input. That value is being fed into the clock frequency modulation, which is set to maximum. So we're having a dramatic effect on the speed of the sequencer completely randomly. And that's why some of these blips, we're in random mode here, which is why it's jumping all over the place. Some of these blips are really, really slow, and some of them are really, really long. If we mess with the frequency modulation, I'm going to slow down the rate at which the sample and hold generator takes its photographs. Let's make it take one photograph every 5 seconds. So now we're going to get 5 seconds at a particular speed, and then it'll choose a new speed, and it'll do that for 5 seconds. And by increasing this FM slider, we're accelerating or expanding the difference, the range of differences between those different control values. So now we get really, really slow at one end of the spectrum and very, very fast at the other end of the spectrum. You can change the fundamental clock frequency. Okay, so by adjusting this clock frequency and the frequency modulation slider in conjunction with the sample and hold generator, which has its own clock, we're really dramatically affecting the nature of the language that's coming out of the droid. Isn't this just a joy? Isn't it just the most joyous thing? I'm so happy. That's just fantastic. What else have we got? We've got another sequencer output here. It doesn't matter that they're coming out of different jacks because we're in 16.1 mode. So both of these sockets here are sending the same information out. We just plugged this cable into this one over here, and we're going into the modulation in of the LFO. So the sequencer step, see all these different random steps from like plus 24 all the way down to minus 22. So as wide a control voltage span as you can imagine. Those sequencer outputs are being sent into the mod in, which is itself set to 1, which is having a modulation effect on the LFO. So even though we see the LFO cycling at 1 Hertz, it's doing much more than that. Sometimes those LFO cycles that are coming out of these sockets here are being like dramatically affected by this sequencer output. Let's hear the effect that it's having. Take it away completely. Throw the cable away. Okay, so this is the LFO at 1 Hertz. That's what it's doing. That's really dramatic. So when you get the really, really fast chatter, that's the LFO being sped up dramatically. Okay. And because we've got all of these different control voltages being fed in as a modulation source, we're basically getting the full gamut of all of those different LFO speeds. And that's basically it. That's nearly the end of the story. The only output we didn't actually discuss was the sine wave being output by VCO2 into the filter, just to finish the... We dealt with all of its inputs, but we didn't actually talk directly about its output. It's a sine wave. So I imagine if we send different types of wave in... That's cool. I've not done that before. I suppose when you think about it, the soft softness of all of R2D2's tones. It has the essence of sine wave about it. And there you go. There's your reward for all your hours of hard work. If you understand the ARP 2600 enough to make droid sounds, then you've leveled up. I think that's just the greatest joy. I hope you agree, and I hope you enjoyed this tutorial series. It's been an absolute joy to do. And join me for the next one. And if you subscribe to my channel and hit notifications, you'll find out what that is and when it is. And I look forward to seeing you then. Thanks very much for watching.